Good morning and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I am Bukola Koka, and coming up on the program, the World Health Organization says Gaza's premature babies still have a long road to go. Thank you for staying tuned. A WHO official says Gaza's premature babies who were once trapped in the strips of Al-Shifa hospital and now evacuated to Egypt still have a long road to go. A group of 28 prematurely born babies evacuated from Gaza's biggest hospital were taken into Egypt for urgent treatment on Monday. According to WHO Emergency Director in Cairo, Rick Brennan, 12 of these children are in critical condition. One group of the babies will be admitted to a hospital in Arish in Egypt's North Sinai, while another group will be transported to hospitals in Cairo.
Each of them is either premature or low birth. 31 premature and low birth weight babies, all of them seriously or critically ill, were successfully evacuated from Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza to Emirati Hospital in southern Gaza. Of those 31, 11 or 12 are critically ill, all the others seriously ill. Each of them is either premature or low birth weight. Each of them has serious infections, and quite a few of them have a low body temperature. So they really do need detailed specialist care. Overnight, they received some antibiotics, supportive therapy, oxygen, and we're hoping that that will help stabilize all of them. Today, 28 of the babies were evacuated to Egypt. They were met by a team of 10 neonatal specialists at the border and have now been moved to hospitals in northern Sinai, in Al-Arish, and one group of the babies has been brought down to hospitals here in Cairo. So it's great to know that they've got that specialized care. There are 3 babies who weren't transferred today. We don't have the details on why they were not transferred, but we expect to get more information over the next day or two.
The newborns had been in North Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, where several others died after their incubators were knocked out amid a collapse of medical services during Israel's military assault on Gaza City. Israeli forces seized Al-Shifa last week to search for what they said was a Hamas tunnel network built underneath. Hundreds of patients, medical staff and displaced people left Al-Shifa at the weekend, with doctors saying they were ejected by troops, and Israel insisting the departures were voluntary.
I've been very clear in denouncing the violations of international humanitarian law and the violations of protection of civilians. And I have not a mandate to classify the acts. There are entities that have that mandate. But I think that more important than a discussion on names is the facts. And let's see the facts. Now, without entering into discussing the accuracy of the numbers that were published by the de facto authorities in Gaza, what is clear is that we have had, in a few weeks, thousands of children killed. So this is what matters. We are witnessing a killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented in any conflict since I am Secretary General.
And one area we focused on this weekend
Member states of the United Nations General Assembly are calling for a ceasefire and an increase in aid to Gaza. Israel has ordered the evacuation of the north of Gaza, but thousands of civilians remain. Food, fuel, medicines and water have been running out across the enclave under Israel's 6-week-old siege. In the south, where hundreds of thousands of Gazans who fled the north of the enclave are still sheltering, there have been reports of Israeli strikes. The United Nations says 2/3 of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been made homeless.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands expresses its gratitude to the Arab group, the OIC and the PGA. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic, alarming really. Essential services have nearly collapsed, with unimaginable consequences for more than 2 million civilians. To this day, humanitarian access continues to be unsafe, severely limited and undependable. The aid that enters Gaza is but a fraction of what is required. An immediate and massive scale-up of aid is needed.
Where is the respect for international humanitarian law? How much more death and destruction can one cope with? How many more attacks on schools, hospitals, humanitarian workers and so on must we witness? The level of suffering in Gaza is unbearable and inhumane. We welcome the UN Security Council resolution adopted last Wednesday. It was long overdue, and a humanitarian ceasefire is now a crucial next step.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic and worsening daily. An immediate humanitarian ceasefire is essential, and we repeat our calls for this, along with an urgent and significant scaling up of humanitarian access and supplies, including food, fuel, water and medical supplies.
Meeting and commitments are not enough. Resolutions and statements are not enough. It needs to be implemented on the ground. We need concrete action now. We need a humanitarian ceasefire now. We need unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance now.
The lack of food, electricity, water, medicines and healthcare is a disaster for the people of Gaza, including for almost 1 million children. The death toll is unbearable. We deplore the continuing denial of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and we call for sufficient, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access immediately.
The horror must stop. Both in the GA and in the Security Council, the absolute and urgent priority must be to prevent further violence against civilians and halt the widespread destruction of infrastructure. We must also make every effort to avoid a regional spillover, which would likely have repercussions beyond imagination.
Australia wants to see the next steps towards a ceasefire agreed by both parties. We welcome recent reports of diplomatic efforts towards the safe release of hostages and to facilitate safe humanitarian access, and we encourage all steps towards this.
U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller is conveying the country's concern for over 1,200 Americans, legal permanent residents and family members still in Gaza. He added in a media briefing that at least 6 U.S. citizens have been killed since the October 7 rampage into Israel by Hamas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Around 800 American citizens, legal permanent residents, and family members have departed through Rafah Gate. There are a little over 1,200 left, which is a higher number than we had when we announced it last week. One of the things that happens is we continue to identify either additional American citizens or American citizens or permanent residents who have additional family members that they're reporting to us that we then try to get on the list to get out of Gaza. With respect to American citizens who have died, the number who died as a result of the attacks of October 7th is the same as it has been. There is one additional casualty in post-October October 7th incidents that I can report out today. There are a total of 6 American citizens who have died, not from the terrorist attacks on October 7th, but in the month plus since. 5 who are members of the IDF, and 1 who is a national police border officer.
Did they die in Israel or in Gaza?
Of those, of the IDF, I believe 4 of them died in Gaza, 1 died in northern Israel. Every innocent life that's lost is a tragedy, and we mourn the loss of every innocent life. These are civilians whose deaths have come through no fault of their own, that are in the conflict that is not of their own making. And I can tell you, speaking for myself, speaking for everyone in this administration, that we feel those deaths every bit as we feel the loss of Israeli civilian lives. The Houthi seizure of the motor vessel Galaxy Leader in the Red Sea is a flagrant violation of international law. We demand the immediate release of the ship and its crew, and we will consult with our allies and UN partners as appropriate on next steps.
Thank you.
Some family members of Israeli hostages abducted by Hamas are very disappointed after meeting with members of Israel's war cabinet. And as Israel's war in Gaza rages, relatives of the over 240 hostages have been advocating for the Israeli government to get their loved ones back as soon as possible. Thousands of family members recently finished a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house in Jerusalem, where he eventually promised that they could meet with members of Israel's war cabinet this week. One of the attendees, Udi Goren, whose cousin Tel Haimi is currently being held by Hamas in Gaza, hoped, according to him, that Israel's government would prioritize the return of the hostages first and foremost.
I went in with one single question, to know if all of the war cabinet supports the same stand that Gantz and Eisenkot took a couple of days ago when they met with us, when they said absolutely clear, without hesitation, that bringing out the hostages is the top priority as far as they're concerned. And now when we've met with the entire cabinet, what we've heard is that taking down Hamas and bringing the hostages are as important, are equally important. As far as I am concerned, and I represent myself and my family, this is incredibly disappointing, because I feel that at this point, when we know that taking down Hamas, we keep hearing from them, is going to take months or years, and it's going to take a long time. On the other hand, the other objective is time sensitive. People are dying.
And the relatives of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza are also urging far-right Israeli lawmakers not to pursue proposed capital punishment for captured Palestinian militants. They fear that talks of doing so may endanger the hostages. They worry the publicity around the capital punishment debate could invite reprisals, even as hopes of a deal to free some of them is growing. Meanwhile, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has called for the death penalty, which is dormant in Israel's law books. The only court-ordered execution in Israel was of convicted Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in 1962. Earlier, the United States had indicated high hopes that a deal to release hostages held by Hamas amid the conflict with Israel is getting closer. Speaking at a media briefing, White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby made this assertion.
I just want to let you know we're still working this hour by hour. I do not have an update for you on the hostage deal that we're trying to negotiate. But as you heard the Deputy National Security Advisor say yesterday, we believe we're closer than we've ever been. So we're hopeful. But there's still work to be done, and nothing is done until it's all done. So we're going to keep working on this. We're also working to increase the flow of life-saving humanitarian assistance, food, water, medicine. We're calling for respecting the international law in terms of minimizing the loss of innocent lives, and of course we're continuing to advocate for humanitarian pauses so that people can get out of harm's way and that aid and assistance can get in. Over the last couple of days, the 18th and the 19th of November, almost 100 trucks carrying humanitarian aid were able to enter Gaza. That brings the total to over 1,260. And then following Israel's announcement that it's allowing fuel now into Gaza to support non-governmental organizations at our strong request, we are now tracking that 6 trucks have crossed down into Gaza with approximately 18,000 gallons of fuel. That will help support food distribution and it will help generators for the hospital so that they can keep working. The total number of U.S. citizens that we've been able to move out of Gaza through that Rafah crossing is now up to 800. We're continuing to work that every day as well.
Now let's begin the first leg of our conversation today as we speak with Senior Lecturer, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Babcock University, Dr. Michael Ogu. Dr. Ogu is reaching us virtually from Nottingham in the United Kingdom. Good morning and thank you for joining us, Dr. Ogu.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
First of all, you're talking to us from the United Kingdom, so perhaps you could give us a sense of the tone and the mood, particularly within the Jewish community and the Palestinian community in the United Kingdom. Has there been a let-up in those protests, or it's just a temporary respite that we're seeing and they're going to resume because the war is still raging?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Of course, I mean, the war in Israel, the war on Hamas, right, by Israel in Gaza is generating a lot of international reactions, and we have seen protests, all across the world, not just in the UK. In fact, just early this week, I think it was the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom was sacked, over issues, comments made, about the police and how they responded to protests by people protesting, on the same issue. So there's just been a lot, and of course, while of course we expect that this protest will continue, because the war continues, and of course, if there's no logical outcome, in terms of negotiations going on and all of this, we expect that this protest will continue, and of course, we can only keep our fingers crossed and see what happens after that. But yeah, protests are still going on, of course, in very, very different forms and magnitudes. The biggest one, I think, was the one that was held on the 12th of November, which was the Remembrance Day. There was a lot of protesters, in the London area, and of course the big cities in the UK, protesting, for the release of the hostages, and of course calling also for ceasefire, so that aid workers, relief materials, and all of that can enter into the Gaza Strip and help those who are troubled. So that is what we're seeing for now, and of course we can only hope for the best from here.
Now, the IDF and Israel as a country is not the only one that is experiencing pressure to ceasefire amid this war. The neighboring Egypt is also experiencing some form of ceasefire to open its Rafah border crossing for Palestinian refugees to gain access and flee to safety. But the disconnect or reluctance of Egypt has met with some form of, it hasn't been totally welcome, particularly by the United States. What options are open to Egypt here, and what do you think about its disposition, towards this Israel-Gaza conflict?
Yeah, so Egypt rather, has been put in a very tight situation. I mean, so far the statistics that we have, even though we can't completely verify the statistics, show that almost 2 million people have been displaced in Gaza already. And it's likely that more of that's is gonna happen as the war progresses. So that, I think, is going to be very overwhelming. And of course, Egypt seems to be the first point of call for these people who are fleeing the conflict in Gaza. So for them it is a huge burden. And just asking them to open their borders without any kind of concrete agreement on how these refugees will be, taken care of, how they will be administered, or where they will go, within the Egyptian society is something that the Egyptian government was not prepared for. And of course, the world was not prepared for what happened on October 7. So I think it might be better, if there's some kind of consensus or some kind of talks as to how Egypt will be supported to take care of these refugees who are moving, because of course Egypt has opened their borders to allow some refugees to cross, but asking them just to open their borders and allow just anybody cross into their country as refugees is also a risk for them. It's also a security risk for them, and understandably they're going to try to count their cost, and see where that keeps them in the grand scheme of things, because they also have their interest, and the war in Gaza is not their own making, so they're going to look at things from the point of interest, from the point of view of their own national interest, and try to do what is best for them. So of course they are not in the very best of positions, and we can only give them some time to sort this out, I think.
And according to the IDF, some 800 in the past 2 weeks or so have been able to leave Gaza, through other borders. Now, what becomes of the proposition and the consensus amongst the international community that the solution to this is a two-state country, for both nations? What becomes of that when, Gaza lies in rubble and most Palestinians have fled the country?
Yeah, the two-state solution is not a new suggestion for the war in Gaza. It has been on for centuries, for decades rather. And Israel has not fully committed to that. Even though the Palestinians have expressed some kind of willingness, and of course, a large majority of Palestinians, are not interested in that two-state solution. So there's just not so much of agreement, on the two-state solution, particularly, in fact, on the implementation of the two-state solution. So those are the issues that have hindered that suggestion from becoming materialized. And I think that, with the campaign of Israel in Gaza now, that is even more difficult, because of course the Palestinians have the shorter end of the stick now in terms of the two-state solution. So nobody's even talking about it in this current event that is going on, because it doesn't even sound logical anymore, because of course Gaza lies in ruins, just like you said. So yeah, perhaps that can come back to the front burner, somewhere down the line, after the war has ended, and of course the healing has begun, and maybe reconstruction and rebuilding have started happening in the Gaza Strip. Then perhaps we can begin to talk about this two-state solution. But I think that of course is one of the most logical, suggestions that have been put forward to bring a kind of lasting solution to this Israel-Gaza war, conflict. The Israel-Palestinian conflict, rather, because this conflict has been brewing, and of course we have had instances of violent aspects of this conflict in the past, so it's not just October 7. I mean, there have been instances also of attacks, by Palestinians on Israel and Israel on Palestinians, of course, for so many centuries or so many decades now. So this is not the first time it's happening, and of course it's just that this time the proportion, the proportion seems overwhelming, and that's why Israel is responding in this kind of magnitude. But of course we can only wait and see, where that leaves us in terms of the two-state solution, and if that comes back to the front burner of the discussions on how to resolve this conflict between these two states.
And there is still the worry, besides the two-state solution being merged in this circumstance, but there is still that worry as well about the loyalty that the people have for Hamas. And if that was in doubt, we see it demonstrated in the video released by the IDF just 2 days ago, showing hospital staff at the Al-Shifa helping to receive hostages from Hamas inside the hospital. If the two-state solution was to become possible, how do we avoid the radicalization that is ongoing of another generation of, Palestinians becoming terrorists? And also, how do you turn the people away from the ideology that Hamas proposes?
Yeah, so the issue of the Hamas, and its administrative structure and its ideologies, of course, it's one that so many states have termed, terrorists, or terrorist ideologies, and perhaps not very far from the truth, because their mode of operation is non-conventional, and seems to give this aura of terrorist activities and all that. So it is not surprising, and of course, if you consider how long they have been in control in the Gaza Strip, it's not also surprising that they have been able to cook up some loyalty for themselves, in the people. I mean, among the Palestinians, and that loyalty seems to also be growing, considering the level of retaliation that Israel, has undertaken on the Gaza Strip in the last few days. In fact, that is even enough, to give more Palestinians reasons to side with Hamas, because I was reading Barack Obama's response, to this Israeli war, and one of his projections was the fact that Israel might be building up more enemies for themselves, in terms of how they are prosecuting and going about this revenge or this retaliation, because it doesn't portray Israel in a very good light in terms of the bombings and the killings, indiscriminate, that are going on in the Gaza Strip. So that might have scored some points for Hamas, to gain some traction and gain some followers too, So all those antics are not so surprising to me, in terms of the traction Israel, the Hamas is gaining, But going forward, if there's going to be any lasting solution, then Hamas has to prove beyond reasonable doubt, that it's an administration that has the interest of the people at heart, number one, and also that has respect for international laws too, because that is one area that Hamas has not been doing so well over the years, in terms of their operation and the strategies, So they must commit to the fact that they have respect for international laws, before they can be taken seriously in the international community of international community, And I think that might be the first step, or first steps in terms of towards gaining some kind of legitimacy for Hamas, in bringing this two-state solution to reality.
To reflect on legitimacy for Hamas, and the coming days will also be very telling, in the pattern that Israel chooses to continue in its prosecution of this war. But we must leave the conversation here for now. Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Ogu, a senior lecturer, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Babcock University here in Nigeria, but he interacted with us from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And still to come on the program, Israeli army releases video set to show Hamas weaponry lab under a mosque. We'll have that story and more coming your way after this break. Join us again. Welcome back. France has sent a military Airbus A400 with more than 10 tons of medical supplies to Gaza. The country is to also contribute to European Union medical and aid flights on November the 23rd and the 30th. France also dispatched a second hospital ship, the helicopter carrier Dixmude, which will arrive in Egypt in the coming days. A first French helicopter carrier, the Tonnerre, which has about 60 beds and 2 operating blocks, has already been deployed in the region. Earlier this month, French planes delivered 54 tons of aid for Gaza via Egypt. The Israeli army has released footage of what it describes as a weaponry lab under a mosque in Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. Army spokesman Daniel Hagari said Israeli forces discovered a factory that produced weapons and unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as tunnels shaft, while searching the Gazan mosque. The location and date of when the video was filmed have not been verified. Israel's South first responders have released security camera footage from October the 7th, which shows Hamas gunmen who crossed into Israel chasing people from an outdoor music festival, with one scene executing a woman at point-blank range. The video shared via South first responders' official Telegram account shows that people who came from the Nova Festival in Re'im arrived at the location where the security cameras were in Kibbutz Alumim, thinking they were safe. The video was posted on Monday. Israel is seeking to fend off international criticism for its response to the Hamas rampage, which sparked a devastating war in Gaza. Despite mounting calls for a ceasefire, Israel has said it will push on with its campaign until Hamas is eradicated. The Israeli military has also released videos set to show strikes on buildings in Lebanon it believes are linked to the Hezbollah militant group. The Israeli army said in a post on their official Telegram account that they had launched a series of attacks via fighter jet, military tanks and a helicopter on infrastructure believed to be operated by the Iran-backed militant group. Again, the location and date of when the video was filmed have not yet been verified. Recently, entrepreneur Elon Musk has been called out for anti-Semitic comments, but White House spokesperson John Kirby says he's not aware of efforts to wean the U.S. government off of using technology companies owned by Elon Musk. He was speaking in response to content on the multi-billionaire social media platform X. And now we have, for the second leg of our conversation, U.S. Army Captain and National Defense and Military Strategist Captain Bish Johnson joining us now. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us, Captain Bish.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Indeed, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin from the end of our first leg of our conversation on the program, during which my guest said, not quoting him copiously now, that if Hamas must become a legitimate organization in the near future and the distant future, it must begin to embrace international rules and laws in its operations. Now, it begs the question, do you agree with this submission that, you know, an organization adjudged a terror organization can ever, for any reason in the near future, be embraced, should it begin to embrace international rules and laws in its operations?
Well, first and foremost, let me say that I agree 100% with my co-panelist who was with you earlier. Yes, there has been instances where organizations that have been designated as terrorist organizations have reformed themselves and gain acceptability. One of those examples is the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. It started off, the same way Hamas started, but down the road, it was able to evolve and reform itself and was able to gain legitimacy within the international community. And let me tell you, we've talked so much about two-state solution. Two-state solution can only be possible if organizations like Hamas will reform itself and begin to obey international laws and norms. If it continues the way it is going right now, that idea of two-state solution will not be nothing but a mirage, because Israel will not be willing to have Hamas in control of any state that is close to Israel. Because you can see what has just happened. They are not a state, yet they were able to amass the kind of weaponry and the training and resources that they were able to amass, and were able to penetrate one of the most fortified borders on the planet, and went into Israel and orchestrated that carnage that we saw on October 7th. So what do you think is going to happen if they are a state and they are able to have their own air force, they are able to have their own navy, they are able to have their own army? It means that Israel will be at a risk of elimination, which is what Hamas had stated in one of his articles of his charters. And so if he wants to play, he must reform himself, and he must be able to begin to respect international laws and norms. Otherwise, if he continues like this, it's only going to be nothing but perpetual circle of violence within that region.
Let's go back to the war itself now and look at what's been happening. Israel has taken control of northern Gaza, but instead of us to have a let-up or a sign of a let-up in the war, it appears that things are continuing, going by reports that we're receiving about the IDF dropping leaflets in the south of the region asking the people to evacuate. Why do you think Israel is continuing with this approach, and where will this all lead?
Well, let me take the second leg of your question. I don't know where it's going to lead to, but I can tell you that why Israel is continuing this operation in the manner that it's doing is because of what happened on October 7th. There was a spectacular intelligence failure and a catastrophic perfect storm in Israel on October 7th. And Israel, being a country that has prided itself to have one of the best intelligence services, the Mossad, and one of the best militaries in the region, the Israeli Defense Forces, is unconscionable and unconscionable that they will have such institutions, and Hamas would have carried out the planning of this siege they carried out on the 7th of October without that intelligence agency being able to be on the know of what was happening. And even when the carnage began, it took Israeli Defense Forces 6 hours to respond. So that is a huge and catastrophic embarrassment to Israeli Defense Forces and the intelligence services. So they cannot stomach it. So there has to be a repercussion such that nobody, including all of Israel's adversaries, will think of doing anything like that in the future, because they know that if they do, there will be similar repercussion. That is why Israel is continuing in its effort in trying to decimate northern Gaza, if you would say, because his adversaries are looking, and they've seen what happened on October 7th. And they realized that if a ragtag Hamas could break through such fortified Israeli defenses and was able to carry out such a spectacular, and it is, and carnage within Israeli territory for over a 6-hour period, how much more some of those state actors like Iran and even Hezbollah that is more powerful than Hamas. So Israel wants to send a very clear message that if you try it, even if you succeed, there will be serious, you will pay severely. And that is why that operation is being carried out in the manner that is being carried out by the Israelis.
I'd like to touch on one of the first few things that you said in your response to this last question and look at it on a broader scale. First of all, there is a theory that that intelligence breach couldn't have happened without a mole being in the IDF's intelligence agency itself, the Mossad. What do you make of that? And then on a grander scale, what do you make of the theory that Western powers are the big profiteers off of this war because of the manufacture of weapons and besides the gas deposits that are in Gaza Strip? What do you make of this theory?
Well, as far as Western powers being the greatest profiteer of the situation, in any situation like this, of course, those who are involved in the defense industry will always benefit. But I don't think it was a deliberate act. There's always going to be some kind of, all kinds of theories whenever situations like this arise. Conspiracy theory is going to be everywhere. I don't think that what happened was a deliberate act. I think what happened was that Israel was blindsided. There was a black spot in terms of them gathering intelligence. They don't have human intelligence gathering capability in Gaza because, as you know, Gaza has been under the control of Hamas. And so they would rely mostly on their technological inter-gathering capabilities, in which sometimes you may not be able to pick, some of the most important things that you need to pick up to be able to connect the dots. So that was why they were unable to detect that. And so I don't believe those conspiracy theories. I believe that there was an intelligence failure. And by the way, this is not the first time something like that has happened. Even in 1967, before the Yom Kippur War, there was similar intelligence failure on the part of the Israelis. And the Israelis responded like this, and they were, at the end of the day, they were successful in taking over some territories from the Syrians and the Egyptians and stuff like that. And so similar thing has happened. You have to be on top of your game all the time, every day, every hour, for you to be able to prevent, that kind of situation from taking place. One small mistake, you're going to pay severely, particularly for a country like Israel that, is located, where it has so many adversaries that are surrounding it. And so some of those conspiracy theories, I don't believe them. I just see them as some of those social media fabrications. But as facts like those, involved in defense industries benefiting from the situation, they will always benefit from such situations. It's not peculiar to the Israeli-Hamas or Palestine problem. If you go to Russia and Ukraine, they are also benefiting from that. Anywhere you have conflict, the people will sought for, for hardware, military hardware, and those who are involved in that sector will always, make money.
We hope it's that simple. But relatedly now, 2 days ago or yesterday, we heard that the Yemeni Houthis intercepted a ship on the sea that was said to belong to Israel. But at the end of the day, Japan has spoken up to say that that ship actually is from its own country. What are your thoughts on the, possible implications of the alignments of other countries of the Middle East with a side in this war for, diplomatic relations for countries across board? Shouldn't there be a need in the near future of a neutral policy to be held such that the situation can be managed as much as possible, particularly in the international community?
This has really been a very complicated situation because of the actors that are involved. Israel, although its international support is waning, but the United States government has never wavered on its support for Israel. We believe that Israel has the right to defend itself. And so there is that concern of escalation. And what you're seeing with the seizure of that ship is that fear almost coming true. Assuming that ship was not just seized, but there was some kind of confrontation that would have led to deaths and stuff like that. That could have gotten the Japanese infuriated, and who knows where that could have landed. And so this escalation, that has been talked about, it's not going to be deliberate. Sometimes, just accidental, an accident somewhere could lead to unforeseen and unplanned escalation. And that's why you see a lot of people, particularly the West and the United States in particular, saying that, look, we don't want this situation to escalate. Because if the situation escalates, what we are seeing in Gaza may be a child's play to what eventually is going to play out. And so, yeah, there's that danger of escalation. And there's a need for international community to rally behind and come up with, a roadmap or a solution, so to say, that makes sure that there is no, whether state or non-state actors that are getting involved in this conflict, so that this conflict can be limited just to Israel and Hamas. That way it'll be much more easier to deal with. By the time it escalates and involves other actors, then it makes it much more difficult and much more complicated to solve the situation.
And lastly, as we try to be optimistic about the coming days, Israel has said that they're closer to a deal for the release of the 240 hostages, some of whose corpses have been found only days ago anyway, will materialize, that a deal is just in the offing, but only because Hamas is beginning to feel the heat of Israeli bombardment amid the war. Do you share that optimism? And particularly, do you think that Hamas will bow to pressure?
Yeah, some of these organizations like Hamas, like ISIS, the only language they understand is the language of force. And so I agree with the Israelis that the amount of pressure being put on them is probably driving their ability to release those hostages. But let me say this. Israel has tested that it has two objectives that are of priority to them, and that is to free the hostages and destroy Hamas. Those two objectives are in conflict. They are antithetical to each other. You cannot destroy Hamas and at the same time free the hostages. And you cannot free the hostages and destroy Hamas. Israel is going to have to, at the end of the day, decide on which of those objectives that he wants to achieve. Because if he goes destroying Hamas, he's going to end up killing some of those hostages. Hamas knew exactly what he was doing. That was why on that October 7th, after the carnage, they were able to take as many as 200 and something hostages because they need those hostages as bargaining chips. And so Israel is in a very tight situation, is in a very difficult position, to achieve those two objectives that he had stated. Because as far as I'm concerned, those two objectives are in conflict with each other. Is either he goes for the release of the hostages or he goes for the destruction of Hamas. And in that case, those hostages will pay the ultimate price in the process of Israel trying to destroy Hamas in that particular difficult terrain where they have those network of tunnels that are crisscrossing northern Gaza. It's a very difficult terrain to fight. You find yourself sometimes in a close quarter battle in which Israel will be prepared to take casualties.
And that was what I was going to ask. That is it a risk that the IDF is willing to take, see those hostages as collateral damage for the total annihilation of Hamas?
Yes, basically, Israel has to make that decision whether it wants to decimate Hamas and risk, some of those hostages, being killed in the process, or he will decide, okay, let's go and negotiate for the release of those hostages, and then Hamas will survive. So it's a difficult position for one to find himself, but at the end of the day, Israel has to make whatever decision is in its best national interest, and go that way.
We could go on and on with the conversation, but we must leave it there for now. We want to thank you very much, retired U.S. Army Captain and National Defense and Military Strategist Captain Bish Johnson. Thank you for joining us, for your time and for your contributions on the program.
Thank you for having me, and do have a pleasant day.
And you too. And still to come on the program. More Palestinian patients arrive in Turkey after evacuation from Gaza. More details shortly. Join us again. Welcome back. Emily Hand, a young Irish-Israeli girl, is one of those kidnapped during the October 7 Hamas surprise attack. Her father, Thomas Hand, who says Emily spent her 9th birthday in captivity, is devastated and says his reason for living was to get his daughter back. Speaking at a press conference in London, England, for the family members of hostages believed to be held in Gaza by the Hamas militants, Mr. Hand fears that Emily will be broken, both mentally and physically, when she gets home. Emily had been on a sleepover at a friend's house in Be'eri, one of a ring of kibbutzes around the Gaza Strip targeted by Hamas.
And believe me, it's a nightmare. If you all have families and kids, just imagine one day one of them's gone. Just gone. You don't know where she is. You don't know what suffering she's going. Whether she's been fed, watered, if she has a place to go, toilet even. She probably doesn't even have a toothbrush or a toothpaste. The basics of life, the simple basics of life: food, water, hygiene. But not only that, just the sheer terror of a 9-year-old girl down in those dark tunnels, never seen the light of day. But sheer terror, panic, every hour of every day. She must be saying every day, "Where's my daddy? Where is my daddy? Why hasn't he come to save me?" It must be going through her head all the time, "Where's daddy?" It was big. People held. And that's what I'm living through. That's what we're all living through. It's a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. We pray that we get them back. I pray I'll get Emily back. I don't know what condition she's going to be in, but she's going to be broken, very broken, mentally and physically. And we will have to fix that.
Turkey has brought 61 patients and 49 people accompanied them to Ankara after evacuating them from Gaza with the aim of treating them. The total number of patients and their companions that have been brought to Turkey is now 150, including 27 patients and 13 companions brought to Ankara last week. Most of the patients are in need of cancer treatment. And as we try to spare a thought for the hostages and those in pain amid this war, we end the program today. Join us again same time tomorrow for another edition of our continuing coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. Thank you for watching. I am Bukola Koka.